Have you ever walked away from someone and watched them suddenly become confused, restless, even obsessed? Why does your absence hurt them more than your presence ever helped them? Tonight, we uncover the psychological war that begins the moment you choose silence, and how walking away restores the power they quietly stole from you. When you decide to walk away, you must understand this truth: you are not simply leaving a person behind. You are seizing back the throne they once occupied in your life. They will not mourn your absence with calm acceptance. They will not sit quietly and reflect on what you have chosen for yourself. Instead, they will feel something far more potent: a sudden, almost violent, sense of power slipping through their fingers. In the intricate theater of human relationships, most people are blind to the subtle chains they weave around others. They believe control is earned through proximity, through constant interaction, through the quiet assertion that their presence is essential to your existence. And for a time, this belief sustains them. They hold the illusion that your life revolves around them, that your loyalty is theirs to command. But the moment you step away, even slightly, the illusion shatters. And what they feel is not sadness, it is loss of influence. And that more than anything can consume them. Imagine for a moment the countless hours they spent building their authority in your life. Perhaps it was subtle, hidden beneath gestures of care or affection. Perhaps it was overt, marked by demands, expectations, or quiet manipulation. They never consciously realized that what they truly craved was control. The power to steer your actions, to shape your thoughts, to dictate your priorities. And then, one day, you make a choice, a deliberate, calculated choice, to detach. You walk away, not in anger, not in spite, but in quiet assertion of self. And instantly the balance of power tilts. The first reaction is confusion. How can this be? They thought they had mapped every corner of your loyalty, every avenue of influence. They thought your presence was a guarantee. And now, that certainty dissolves. Their mind races. Every word you ever said, every compromise they coaxed from you, is suddenly reframed. They replay moments, wondering where they overstepped, what they misjudged. In their desperation to regain footing, they feel themselves shrinking. Their dominance is challenged, their assumed power rendered meaningless, and the realization strikes like a cold gust across a deserted courtyard. They are not in control. You are. This sense of loss is insidious. It gnaws at them because they are unaccustomed to instability, to vulnerability, to the possibility that someone else, someone they underestimated, can choose freely without seeking permission. Humans, especially those who depend on influence over others, do not react well to unpredictability. Your absence is a weapon precisely because it is unexpected, and they do not understand that you wield it not to punish, but to assert sovereignty over your own life. The power dynamics, which they assumed were firmly in their grasp, are now fluid, and that fluidity terrifies them. Notice, too, how this manifests in subtle ways. They may attempt to reclaim your attention, to negotiate your presence with promises or excuses. They may project anger, guilt, or disappointment. But each of these reactions is an admission. They sense the shift in power, they feel the authority slipping, and they cannot tolerate it. Even the most rational among them will feel the pull of insecurity. In their mind, your decision to walk away is not just a personal choice. It is a challenge, a direct threat to the kingdom of influence they had painstakingly constructed. And as any ruler will tell you, the loss of a kingdom is intolerable. The beauty of this truth, of course, lies in its subtlety. You do not have to raise your voice, issue ultimatums, or make your intentions loud and clear. Your departure alone is a declaration, louder than any word, sharper than any dagger. In walking away, you invert the hierarchy they believed was unshakable. They no longer dictate the terms you do. Their identity, often so closely tied to the control they hold over others, becomes fragile. Their confidence wanes, replaced by doubt and unease. And in that quiet, unacknowledged turbulence, you reclaim the space they thought was theirs. It is essential to recognize that this is not cruelty. It is strategy. It is understanding the human heart not as a vessel of sentiment, but as a battlefield of power. Most people will never acknowledge that your absence unsettles them because it forces introspection, and introspection reveals weaknesses they are loath to confront. They will seek to mask it with pride, with indifference, with calculated anger. Yet beneath the surface, the realization persists. The one they believed captive to their influence has chosen freedom. They are no longer the puppet masters they assumed themselves to be. And this is the moment where subtle transformation occurs. They begin to see you differently, not through the lens of possession or obligation, but through the lens of choice. Your autonomy forces them to reckon with their own limitations. It is disarming. It is humbling. And while they may never articulate it aloud, they are aware that the game has changed. The power they once assumed is now a memory, and you are the one holding the narrative. The initial sting of your departure may provoke anger, frustration, even attempts at coercion. But this is temporary. Over time, the absence becomes a mirror reflecting their dependence, their insecurity, their reliance on control. And in that reflection, they confront the truth they most fear. Influence is never granted, it is maintained. And when you choose to walk away, you demonstrate that ultimate truth with silent authority. There is a subtle art more powerful than words, more potent than confrontation. Silence. When you choose to walk away and do not explain yourself, you are no longer merely absent. You become a force, a presence felt more acutely in your absence than you ever could be in your words. People are accustomed to noise, to argument, to explanation. They expect reasons, justifications, confessions. But silence. Silence is a mirror in which they are forced to see themselves, and it is in that reflection that your true power resides. Consider the moment you stop answering, stop justifying, stop placating. Initially, the mind of the other races with confusion. What have I done wrong? Did I misread them? Why are they not responding? They search for patterns, for clues, for any fragment of explanation that can restore their sense of control. Humans crave closure, they crave understanding, and when you deny them both, you wield a weapon sharper than any confrontation. You introduce doubt, uncertainty, and a profound discomfort that gnaws at their psyche. The psychological mechanics are simple, yet cruelly effective. When someone loses access to your words, they begin to fill the void themselves. They imagine slights, offenses, mistakes. They replay past interactions with a microscope, scrutinizing every nuance, every phrase, desperate to uncover the cause of your departure. And the more they speculate, the more they are trapped in a labyrinth of their own making, a prison constructed entirely from their insecurities. What is remarkable about this is that they will never fully realize you are the architect of their torment. They will think the chaos originates within themselves, that the confusion is a consequence of their own misjudgments. You, in your silent majesty, are already outside the arena, observing, unshaken, untouched. And that detachment, that refusal to react, amplifies the effect. Every pause, every unanswered message, every absent visit resonates like a bell of authority that they cannot silence. Silence also operates as a mirror of accountability. When you stop explaining, you force the other to confront their own behavior. They may have assumed that your patience, your attention, or your loyalty was endless, a resource to be consumed without thought. But silence exposes the truth. Loyalty is not infinite. Patience has limits, and autonomy is a treasure they cannot possess. The psychological tension grows because they understand, on a subconscious level, that the power they believed they held over you is an illusion, now broken by your refusal to participate in their narrative. In many ways, silence is a trap. They attempt to provoke responses, to reclaim your attention, to test boundaries. But every action they take against your quiet only reinforces the lesson. They are reacting, and you are deliberate. You are outside the cycle of provocation and defense. They are trapped in a storm of imagined consequences, while you remain calm, calculated, untouchable. And in this way, silence becomes not just a withdrawal, but a siege, one waged with elegance and restraint. The danger for them is profound. Humans are notoriously impatient with ambiguity. They crave resolution, and when none is offered, they fabricate their own. Your silence forces them into self-reflection and self-doubt. They become prisoners of speculation, haunted by scenarios that may never have existed. Every imagined betrayal, every assumed slight, every hypothetical insult becomes a chain binding them to the consequences of your choice, consequences they cannot control. And yet the effect of silence is not only punishment. It is revelation. It exposes the dynamics that were always present but ignored. The subtle manipulations, the quiet dependencies, the unspoken hierarchies. It shows them the reality that you are not theirs to command, that you are an agent of your own will. Their discomfort is a testament to their reliance on you. And in this discomfort, your power is undeniable. Silence also reshapes memory. They will recall the past differently, now colored by absence. Every conversation where they assumed control, every favor they demanded, every expectation they placed on you will be reassessed. And while they may attempt to rationalize your behavior as capricious or cruel, the truth lingers beneath the surface. You walked away not out of whim, but by choice, and that choice is an assertion of autonomy they can neither comprehend nor challenge. In the theater of human relations, words are ephemeral. They can be twisted, ignored, or countered. Silence, however, is permanent. It cannot be bargained with. It cannot be misconstrued, for it conveys a clarity that is unmistakable. Your presence is yours alone, and you will not justify it to anyone. Every unanswered question, every ignored appeal, is a reminder of the authority you reclaim the moment you refuse to be drawn into their drama. As days turn into weeks, as absence stretches, they begin to internalize the lesson. The instability you introduce forces them to confront the fragility of their control, and that confrontation breeds an awareness they had previously avoided. The silence you maintain becomes a constant, a shadow of influence stronger than any spoken word could achieve. They think they are analyzing you, controlling the situation, but in truth, they are learning that influence over another is only ever an illusion. And autonomy is the ultimate weapon in human interaction. When you choose to walk away, you are not simply stepping back from someone's presence. You are overturning an entire dynamic of reliance that they assumed was permanent. Dependence is subtle. It does not announce itself with grand gestures. It creeps quietly into interactions, disguising itself as trust, affection, or mutual need. But in truth, dependence is a form of control. Those who rely on you for attention, approval, or validation unknowingly surrender authority to you. They assume, often unconsciously, that your presence is guaranteed, that your loyalty is inexhaustible, that your patience is unending. And when you withdraw, the illusion collapses. It begins in the mind of the other, almost imperceptibly at first. They notice your absence not as a loss of physical proximity, but as a rupture in the structure they have built around themselves. Their confidence, which once rested on the certainty of your attention, falters. Every expectation they had assumed, every demand they believed you would always satisfy, is suddenly challenged. The world they constructed, in which they felt central and indispensable, becomes unstable. They are forced to confront the fact that they were, in reality, leaning on you far more than you were leaning on them. This realization is not immediate, it manifests in stages. First comes disbelief. How could someone they considered constant, reliable, and predictable choose to remove themselves? It feels like a betrayal, though in truth it is only autonomy asserting itself. Then comes agitation. The mind of the dependent cannot rest. They replay past interactions, searching for signs of imbalance, questioning where they went wrong, wondering if their actions drove you to this distance. They imagine every slight, every misstep, every instance in which they may have relied too heavily on your presence, and a sense of vulnerability begins to seep in. Walking away reverses dependence in a more profound sense than mere absence could ever achieve. It forces them to confront the reality that their stability, their sense of self-importance, and often their emotional equilibrium relied upon your consent and participation. Until now, they believed themselves to be the orchestrators of connection, the directors of interaction, the holders of influence. But once you withdraw, you reveal that it was always you holding the power, whether they recognized it or not. The beauty of this is in the subtlety. You do not have to explain your actions, justify your distance, or offer ultimatums. Your departure alone is a mirror in which they see their own dependence reflected. Every plea they make, every attempt to reestablish contact, every effort to reclaim your attention is evidence of the inversion of power. They are reacting, you are detached. They are destabilized, you are serene. In their scramble, they realize that the world they thought they controlled has quietly shifted. And it is not a shift they orchestrated. Dependence, after all, breeds a sense of entitlement. They believe that you will always be available, that your time and attention are theirs to command. Walking away exposes the fallacy of that entitlement. They must now grapple with the fact that what they assumed to be permanent was, in reality, a privilege they can no longer take for granted. The discomfort is profound. For some, it may provoke frustration, anger, or attempts at manipulation, but for others it triggers reflection. In every case, the balance of influence has been reversed. You, who they assumed relied upon them, are now the one who holds choice, control, and freedom. The psychological tension created by reversing dependence is both subtle and potent. They feel exposed, not because they fear losing you entirely, but because they realize the extent to which their stability depended on your presence. Your absence becomes a mirror that reflects not your vulnerability, but theirs. Every imagined scenario, every silent hour, every unanswered message magnifies the truth. They were more reliant on you than they ever admitted, even to themselves. The power that once seemed theirs is gone, replaced by the quiet authority of one who chooses autonomy over obligation. In this dynamic, walking away becomes an exercise in revelation. You demonstrate that freedom is stronger than possession, that independence is a weapon more potent than any argument, and that the human need for certainty is a vulnerability to be observed, not exploited. Those who depended on you are forced to confront their own assumptions, their own reliance, and their own fragility. Every attempt to regain footing only reinforces the lesson. Stability cannot be taken from another. It can only be maintained by one's own strength. Dependence, once reversed, has long-term consequences. People who once held sway over your choices begin to recognize the limits of their influence. They may attempt to restore equilibrium, to reassert themselves, but the dynamic has shifted irreversibly. Your absence, your choice to step back, has illuminated the truth. Relationships are not merely about presence, but about balance of power, and those who fail to recognize it are left grasping at the void. This inversion is subtle yet undeniable. Every glance, every hesitation, every tentative approach is evidence of a newfound awareness. They recognize that the world is not as they imagined. They realize that their sense of control was borrowed from you, that their stability depended on a source outside themselves. And as they adjust, as they come to terms with their own dependence, they cannot help but see the quiet strength in your choice to walk away. There is a principle so simple, yet so overlooked, that most people fail to recognize its power. Absence is not emptiness, it is influence. When you walk away, you do not merely create a physical distance. You create a psychological shift, a space in which your presence gains weight, authority, and significance. People seldom value what is always within reach, and they rarely recognize the influence of someone until that influence is removed. Distance, when wielded deliberately, transforms perception. It turns familiarity into desire, routine into longing, and presence into currency. The first effect of distance is attention. Humans are creatures of immediacy. They are conditioned to take for granted what is readily available. When you are constantly present, your worth is diluted. Your attention becomes expected, your loyalty assumed, your value hidden beneath the monotony of accessibility. But the moment you withdraw, the mundane transforms into remarkable. They notice details they had ignored, remember moments they had dismissed, and suddenly, the absence of your presence becomes an echo louder than any word. They feel it in ways they cannot articulate. A subtle pull, a nagging recognition that what they once had is no longer guaranteed. This is the alchemy of distance. It does not merely highlight your absence, it amplifies your significance. People begin to measure you not by what you have offered in the past, but by what your absence now demands of their attention. Each interaction they missed, each conversation left unfinished, each moment taken for granted becomes magnified. And in this magnification, your value rises, not because you have changed, but because the void you leave allows them to see what was always there. The familiar becomes precious precisely because it is no longer assured. Distance also creates a subtle form of power, known only to those who understand human psychology. When you step back, you force others to confront the scarcity of your presence. Scarcity, as in the market of influence, breeds desire. People who once ignored or dismissed you begin to reassess priorities, reflect on what was once trivial, and consider the weight of their own behavior. Every lapse, every oversight, every assumption that you would always be available is thrown into sharp relief. Your absence becomes an unspoken standard by which they measure themselves and their choices. And in that measurement, they realize the depth of what they have lost. The psychological consequences are profound. They begin to feel the gravity of your absence in ways that presence could never convey. Presence can soothe, distract, or placate. Presence can be bargained with or manipulated. Absence, however, leaves no room for compromise. It confronts them with the truth that your attention, your care, your loyalty, everything they assumed was theirs, must now be earned, observed, and respected. It becomes a mirror reflecting their dependence, their complacency, and their failure to recognize value when it was freely given. Distance also reframes memory. They recall your words, your gestures, your presence differently once you are removed from the immediate equation. Moments that were once routine gain significance. Words that were overlooked now resonate. Silences that were once empty become loaded with meaning. And in this reevaluation, they confront an undeniable truth. Value is often invisible when constant, but it becomes undeniable when scarce. Your withdrawal is not abandonment, it is revelation. Moreover, distance forces introspection, not just about your worth, but about their own behavior. People cannot help but ask themselves why your absence affects them so profoundly. They analyze past interactions, scrutinize their actions, and question their assumptions. And in doing so, they begin to recognize patterns, behaviors, and dependencies that were previously invisible. They are forced to acknowledge the reality that your presence was never just a convenience. It was a choice, a deliberate allocation of time, attention, and care. When that choice is no longer theirs to command, they recognize the subtle influence you always held. The strategic value of distance lies in the control it grants. Unlike confrontation, which provokes resistance, or persuasion, which can be resisted, absence cannot be argued with. It is absolute. It is a force beyond negotiation. Those who once relied on constant access to you are now confronted with the consequences of your autonomy. They may attempt to reclaim your attention, they may rationalize your absence, or they may project frustration and resentment, but the truth remains your value has increased, precisely because it is no longer taken for granted. This is the essence of subtle mastery, understanding that presence is not always power, and absence is not always weakness. By creating distance, you command reflection, respect, and recalibration. You teach the lesson that the measure of significance is not in availability, but in scarcity. Every gesture of withdrawal, every moment of silence, every carefully maintained separation transforms the perception of those around you. They begin to see you not as a given, not as someone to be relied upon without consideration, but as a force of consequence, a presence whose weight cannot be ignored. And in this recalibration, your influence is restored, your authority reaffirmed, and your autonomy unchallenged. Distance is not passive. It is deliberate. It is a weapon, a mirror, and a teacher. Those who once undervalued you now measure themselves against your absence, and in doing so, they discover the depth of the space you always occupied. An influence they never fully appreciated until it was beyond their reach. To walk away is not to surrender. It is to assert. It is the quiet command that reshapes perception, destabilizes illusions, and reveals truths others are too comfortable to face. In doing so, you expose the fragility of dependence, the illusions of control, and the unnoticed weight of your presence. You teach without speaking, influence without enforcing, and dominate without confrontation. Those left behind will feel confusion, doubt, and even a subtle fear, because they are confronted with the truth that loyalty, attention, and care are not owed. They are chosen. Your absence strips them of certainty, forces introspection, and inverts the power they believed was theirs. The silence you maintain becomes a psychological weapon. The distance you create magnifies your value, and the autonomy you assert reminds them that influence is never granted. It is recognized, earned, or lost. Walking away transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary. It takes what was once invisible and renders it undeniable. It teaches that presence is not power, but freedom is, that influence is fleeting, yet perception is eternal. And in this orchestration, you emerge not as the one who fled, but as the one who mastered the game, whose absence commands attention, whose silence dictates reflection, and whose autonomy restores the throne that was always yours to claim.